If you feel like you're being watched or followed in a forest, especially in Florida, you probably are. This woman recently went to Ocala National Forest and had something follow her home, and to me it sounds like it might be one of the watchers. She and her boyfriend went camping in Ocala National Forest recently, and the entire time they were there, they felt like they were being watched. She said as soon as they stepped out of the pickup truck, she could feel eyes on her. And the farther she walked into the woods, the more prevalent that feeling became until she started getting goosebumps all up her neck. She ignored it for whatever reason, and her boyfriend told her she was just imagining it. It was nothing, maybe it was an animal watching them if anything, but it was probably just in her head. They set up camp for the night, they get all cozy, they have a few beers by the fire, and then they decide to go to bed. But right before they enter the tent, they start hearing screaming. This was not a bobcat or any other animal making the noise, she said, because she was hearing the words, "Please help me," over and over and over. Her boyfriend decides to go check it out and tells her to stay where she is, and he can't find anyone out there. He said there were no lights. The sound completely went away when he stepped into the forest. It was like nothing had happened. The rest of the night, they kept listening to see if anybody was screaming and needed help, but they didn't hear anything else. They decide to go for a hike the next day, and while they're walking down a trail, she starts getting that feeling again that they are being watched, and she turns to her right, and she sees a shadow duck behind a tree. She freezes and tells her boyfriend what she saw, and he's like, "You're imagining things. There's nobody there." Again, she ignores her instinct, and they keep walking, and again, she sees a shadow duck behind a tree when she goes to look at it. They decide to go for a swim at one point during this camping trip, and she said it felt like somebody tugged on her ankle, trying to pull her underwater. Like shit was happening the entire time they were there, and she kept trying to ignore it and brush it off. When they finally pack up and go to leave, they are pulling out of the campground and driving down a road with trees on either side because they're still in Ocala National Forest, and she says she sees at least 3 people standing on the side of the road in the tree line watching them. This time her boyfriend makes a noise like he saw them too, but when she asks, "Did you just see those people?" he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." She looks in the rearview mirror and they're gone. They get back home, she unpacks her camping gear, she tries to, just brush off what happened, thinks it was just a weird experience, but it's over now. But then she starts to feel that feeling again, that she is being watched. She goes to take a shower, and then when she's done, she's brushing her hair and looking in the mirror when she sees behind her in the window of her bathroom a shadow standing there. She whirls around to look at it, and this time the figure is still there when she turns around, and then it just slowly starts to lower itself until it's gone. She throws her robe on, runs outside, and there is nobody there. She said she has 3 very large dogs that would have reacted if a person walked up to her house, but they didn't bark at all. A few days go by and nothing has happened, so she thinks maybe it's over, and she tries her best to forget about it. She's driving on her way to work one morning, and she comes up to a stoplight and is looking straight ahead, and then all of a sudden hears on her car window. She turns, and there is a man standing there with both hands pressed against her window, just staring at her with a blank expression on his face. She said something about his face looked very uncanny and unnerving. It did not look like she was looking at a person. He stood there staring at her for several seconds, and then he just walked away. She turns around like, is anybody else in any of the other cars looking at this, seeing what's happening, and nobody seemed to have noticed. She had a bunch of other experiences that she told me about, but this video is already getting way too long, but she still is experiencing things happening like that to this day. She will still see shadow figures on the side of the road if she's driving at night. She will still feel like she's being watched, especially when her and her partner are laying in bed at night. And she says wherever she goes, she gets the feeling that she is no longer alone. I have never personally heard about the Watchers leaving the forest, so this story is really intriguing to me for a few reasons. But what do you think? Did she encounter the Watcher, or is it something else?
Do you guys want to hear a scary story? Last night, I cuddled with something that wasn't human. Let me explain. So, I was having some questionable activity, really kind of scary and weird happening in my house. I didn't really know how to explain. And then it just kind of stopped. I did some things, I staged my space, and nothing was happening. So I'm like, great, in the clear, right? I feel like with me and paranormal experiences, every time I think I'm in the clear, I'm not. And that's when something happens, and I should know better. So I normally go to bed fairly early because I have to wake up at 4:30 during the week for work. So since I normally go to bed, I try to be in bed by 10, but my boyfriend gets home later from work and goes to work not at obviously 4 a.m., a little bit later in the afternoon the next day. So he normally stays up till 1. So when he eventually gets in bed, I'm used to like feeling him normally grab me and like cuddle me. Grab me and cuddle me, right? So last night, I'm like extra tired these past couple days because I just worked bartending at Barry Jackson, like 13-hour days back to back on my feet without food, without breaks. Like, I am exhausted. So I haven't had a day to fully like reset myself to sleep, you know, like a normal human. Because after Barry Jackson's over, it's straight back to 4 a.m. So anyways, it's about 1:30 in the morning. At the time, I didn't know what time it was. I found this out, obviously, when I looked at my phone after everything happened. But I just feel like someone get in the bed. And my boyfriend plays FIFA. Like, that's, like, his downtime thing. Like, when I go to sleep and stuff, like, he plays FIFA. And he always has it on, like, very low volume with, like, low music playing in the background. And I just feel like something sink into the bed. And I can hear his music, like, really lightly playing, right? And when I feel something get into the bed, again, I'm thinking it's my man, I don't feel him, like, grab me, which normally he does when he gets in bed. Like, he grabs me and, like, gives me a hug, kiss on the forehead. Like, I can feel it even though I'm half asleep, you know? And I'm waiting for him to kind of grab me, and I just get this very odd feeling. The hair on, like, my neck starts standing up. And mind you, again, I am freaking out of it. I'm groggy. And I'm kind of like, what's going on, you know? Then I get really cold. And something smells weird. Something stinks. And, like, one thing about my man, he smells good all the time. And I was just like, this is so weird. And that, like, woke me up. I started getting freezing. And, like, I'm pulling the covers even tighter over me. And I'm trying to pull the covers on me. It's like they're getting caught by something, like something was holding them. And I turned around and I was like, as I'm turning around, like, my eyes are closed still, right? Like, I'm out of it. I'm like, babe, and I'm pulling the blanket back and it's not moving. And then I feel so slightly like a little tapping on my shoulder. My boyfriend does not tap my shoulder. Like, it was the most bizarre little tap, 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 but it was like forceful taps, if that makes any sense. And I was like, babe, what are you doing? And I start getting irritated because, again, I have to be up in like 3 hours and he never gets in the way of my sleep and stuff. Like, he's not one to wake me up when he knows I have to work, you know what I mean? And I went to yank the covers and the covers yanked back so hard that, like, I flipped over. And when I flip over, I don't see my boyfriend. Nobody's in the bed. I literally thought I was having a dream. I was like, oh my God, I'm sitting there for a minute. I turn around and look at my phone. It's 1:30. I thought I was having a bad dream. But the smell, that bad smell was still lingering in the room and it was still freezing. And I realized, like, no, like, this is not a dream. So I started screaming for him. And my boyfriend, like, runs in the room all fast. He's like, what's going on? What are you doing up? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, what? Were you just in here? Like, where are you? What are you doing? And he's like, no, I was in the bathroom. And he'll go in the other bathroom, like, when I'm sleeping, because he doesn't want to wake me up, because it's, like, our bathroom is obviously attached to our bedroom. So, like, if he has to go to the bathroom at night, he'll go to the one, like, our spare bathroom, so the light and all that doesn't wake me up. And he was like, what is going on? And I realized that this activity is not over. And I start feeling very unsettled because the way I felt a whole ass body, and I guess cuddling is a little dramatic because obviously it was just the taps, but I felt a body sink into the bed. Like, and it reminded me of one of the encounters I had with the girls I used to babysit for. Like, something very similar happened there. But it was so spooky to me how, like, whatever this is just, like, is pulling the covers and, like, touching me. And ugh, I literally have chills again. That's all for now. Whenever I have an update, I will let you guys know. But, man, I will say one thing. We're moving in, like, 2 weeks, and I can't wait because I am so unwell right now over this, and I don't know if it's something that's following me or the home, but all I know is I just want to get out of this apartment and hopefully start fresh. Bye.
I'm currently waiting for my car to thaw out, and I thought it would be a good time to tell you about this incident that has been on my mind lately because the person that it involves added me on Facebook recently, and this person has been considered a family friend for a really long time, hence why I was able to babysit for them. Segue into the story. I babysat for this family, okay? At first it was great because the kids were nice, they were sweet, they were adorable, the family paid really well, and like I said, like, we knew them, we knew this family well. Like, we mingled with them in the neighborhood before. But one Saturday night I get called to go babysit, so I walk like a couple houses down to their house, whatever, it's a normal Saturday. So it starts off as a normal night. Me and the kids are playing board games, we're watching movies together, and then I had to send them to bed. And then after that, I'm lounging on the couch, you know, scrolling through the channels, scrolling through Facebook. TikTok was not a thing. It was Musical.ly back then, and I was not interested. Whatever. Then suddenly I heard a thump come from upstairs, and the kids' bedrooms are upstairs. So I was like, they're fucking awake and fucking around. So I went to go check on them, and they were sleeping. So I knew it wasn't them. So I was like, okay, well, maybe it was just like a thump or something, I don't know. As I was making my way back down the stairs, I heard rustling and another thump. And that's when I started to realize that the thump was coming from the master bedroom, which the door was shut. I wasn't technically supposed to go in there, but the curiosity got me. I was like, what is that? I need to keep myself safe. I need to keep these kids safe. Like, we need to see. So I pushed the door open a little bit, like slightly, very slowly push the door open and creak in. And at first, it seems like everything is normal, like ordinary bedroom-esque type shit. I'm standing in the doorway and I'm scanning the room, and then all of a sudden I see the closet door is kind of like half ajar open. But I knew that there wasn't nothing in there because I could hear a faint rustling sound. So bravely, and maybe stupidly, I made my way through the room into the closet door. And when I put my hand on the closet door, the rustling kind of stopped, and I was like, oh fuck, what's going on? But I really don't know what came over me. I got some kind of burst of bravery, and I opened up the closet door really fast, like snatched that shit open. I thought that it was gonna be some kind of paranormal activity, paranormal something, but it was a man who I had never seen before, crouched down in the fucking closet, like hunched over in the closet on the floor. So I'm screaming, he's screaming, the girls hear us screaming, they start screaming. It's a whole screaming fest in the house. In the panic, I demand to know who he is, what he's doing there, and what the fuck is even going on. I know you're thinking, okay, it's some homeless man who like broke into the house or whatever, but no, it's even more fucked up than that. So I had only ever met the mother, okay? I had no idea that the father was out, like, deployed, okay? He was supposed to be deployed. So I didn't know that the man that the wife was going out on a date with was not the husband. That was not their father. That was just, like, some random guy. Then he starts babbling about how he was deployed and then he had to come back early, or he came back early, said he was gonna surprise his wife, and he caught her cheating, but didn't want to like confront her or anything, so he just kind of like hid in the closet. I'm like, buddy, you can't be in here right now, or I'm gonna call the cops. If this story is really fucking true, then you're gonna go wait out in the shed, or you're gonna go like out and wait somewhere else. Like, this is not okay. Like, you are not gonna be in here with me and these little kids, because I really don't know if the story's true or whatever. Like, I honestly, why didn't I call the police? I don't fucking know. But the story did check out at the end, because the wife came home, right? Oh my god, the wife came home. Her husband like hobbled out of the fucking shed that I made him go stay in, confronted her and her boyfriend walking up the driveway, and that's when I was like, ooh, I gotta go. I don't want to be here for this. So I fucking left. So I literally just left and walked back to my house. I tried to explain the whole situation to my parents, but they were not having it. They were like, you make up stories all the time. You're a pathological liar, which, to be fair, I did make up shit all the time to them because I wanted to get out of shit a lot. So they had a hard time believing anything that I said ever. So that's kind of why, like, whenever you hear these stories, I'm like, yeah, I didn't really tell my parents, because that's why I would tell them, and then they would want to send me to the fucking crazy house in a straitjacket. Yeah. Yes, that was absolutely terrifying, confusing, and weird, and I really don't know the outcome. I'm pretty sure she married the boyfriend. Because on Facebook, I see him in the profile picture. I don't know if they're married or whatever, but that's my story. I'm gonna go to work now.
Let's read another true and scary story. This one comes from Celeste. Hi there. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I lived in a remarkably small town in the upper part of Texas, specifically in the Panhandle region, which was extremely haunted. My mother, a twin, firmly believes in her connection to the spiritual realm, and I honestly share her belief, considering the numerous paranormal experiences that have occurred within our family. Among those incidents, one stands out and has left an indelible mark on my mind. It was just a regular night as we got ready for bed. My family and I didn't have our own house yet, so we were staying with my aunt. We were all gathered watching the news when my mom was doing my hair. A story came on about our local high school catching fire. Since we only lived down the street, we rushed out and looked at the burning building, which was just a few blocks away. My mom and cousin decided to walk down and get a closer look, but of course, the children had to go to bed because the elementary school was still open. My dad and aunt stayed back to watch the news updates. I headed to bed and fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. I'm not sure how much time passed before I woke up gasping for air and scratching at my neck, trying to loosen whatever was choking me. I finally opened my eyes and realized that nothing was doing this to me. After a few seconds, it released and I was finally able to catch my breath. When I turned over to go back to sleep, I saw a white figure of a woman lying on her back right beside me. She slowly turned her head towards me and laughed, and I mean a manic, unhuman laugh. I ran screaming to my dad and aunt, and they just told me to go back to sleep, claiming that nothing had happened. I still see this woman sometimes when I close my eyes. Luckily, over the years, as I grew my faith in God, I've become more distant from her. We saw her a few more times in that house. She was almost like a lady in white. My mom confirmed to me that she did haunt that house. I've always been grateful that my mom believed me. This is so scary, and it's not even like you had sleep paralysis or anything like that because you were able to move and you were aware. Please feel free to send me any other stories that you do have from your childhood. This is so freaky and I would love to hear more. If you guys have any personal stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can, and I will see you in the next one.
Well, a girl sent me a story saying that she thinks that she has had actual evil following her around since she was a child, and it is still going on today, and she is absolutely terrified. So a little backstory on Tessa. We're going to call her Tessa for the story. She has always been into the paranormal and horror, and she realized at a very young age that she had gifts. Ever since she was little, she would hear these voices talking to her, and she would have these awful night terrors about demons. These demons were about 7-8 feet tall. They were always dark, and they were always disfigured. They had eyes that were visible, but not necessarily glowing, and they had really long, bony, muscular fingers. So quite a few years ago, she has her first intense experience with a spirit. It was at her grandmother's house, and she would shut her door, but she would forget to turn her hall light off. So one night, she gets in bed, she goes to sleep. She wakes up in the middle of the night because she hears these scratching noises. I mean, these scratching noises sound deafening. It sounds like someone is taking a sharp object and scratching the door with it. So she gets up, she looks down at the door, underneath the door, and she can see underneath the door multiple feet. Now, she doesn't know whose feet these were, but she knows that they weren't her family's because everybody was asleep. Then she starts to hear this dragging noise. Like, it sounds like someone is taking wood and dragging it across the floor. So she's sitting there listening to this, absolutely frozen in fear, when she starts to hear tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. Now this starts driving her crazy. Her heart starts racing and she's getting really dizzy and she feels nauseous. That happens. She doesn't really do anything about it because she doesn't know what to do about it. So I'm assuming she fell back asleep. She didn't say at this point. She just jumped to the next part of the story, which is she's Christian. So at this time, she was going to a church camp with her friends and they were all assigned together in the same house. So the first night that they get to this camp, they're all young. They're all feeling really scared for some reason. There is no reason for it. They just feel like someone is watching them. She said that's the only way that she could explain it. Like that feeling you get when someone's watching you. So they're trying the best they can to ignore this feeling, but it is really eating at them. So they go through the day like this and nighttime comes. So one of her friends is sleeping on this shorter couch and Tessa is sleeping on this longer couch. Well, since Tessa was the lightest sleeper of the group, her friends asked her if she could please set an alarm so that she could wake them all up in the morning. So they all go to sleep. She sets the alarm. And the middle of the night comes and Tessa wakes up to her alarm going off and she's hearing it go off, but she cannot find her phone anywhere. It's not on the charger. So she's looking around the room, scanning the room until she sees her dad standing in the corner of the room. She's staring at him in shock. Her dad is obviously not there. So she's trying to get a closer look at him and his face is like distorting. And then he starts to take one step towards her and then another one. And his walk is awkward and he's just getting closer and closer to her. She said that as soon as he got to her, she passed out. So she wakes up the next morning like, what is going on? She's looking for her phone still. She can't find it anywhere. And she finally finds it. And it's in the kitchen. And the alarm has been turned off. So she's obviously pretty freaked out about this. But again, there's nothing that she can do about it. So later on that day, they go to church. And then after church, they all have some free time before Bible study. And this is where it gets even creepier. So later on that day, she decides that she is going to tell her friends what went on. And so she walks up to her friends. She tells them about the phone and everything that's going on. When suddenly everything just goes quiet except for she starts hearing this static noise. And it's like interrupting her conversation. And her friends, she looks at her friends and she's like, did you hear that? As soon as she says that, it just stops and no one else heard it but her. Now, this next part is probably the most unnerving to me besides the father, because it's weird. Later on that night, they do this Bible study, and it's her and 12 girls and her mother is the one doing the Bible study. While her mom is doing the Bible study, her and her friends start texting each other. And as they're texting each other, suddenly her mom gets a notification on her phone. And as soon as her mom gets the notification on her phone, she looks at her mom, and her mom looks up. And as soon as her mom looks up, her face just starts changing. And she said that in a voice that sounded like it was a recording. She said, "Get off your phone." She said at this point, she's kind of just like sitting there, like, what just happened? She's looking around at her friends, but her friends don't seem baffled or concerned at all. And so she waits till the Bible study's done, and she asks her friends, like, did you see what happened with my mom during Bible study? And they were like, what? No. What are you talking about? No one else saw it but her. No one else heard the static but her. No one else saw her mom but her. No one else experienced anything the entire time except for her. She said that as soon as she got home from the summit, everything actually stopped for a while. And then years later, it started back up again. And now she said she's dealing with it now, except for it's much more aggressive. It's more violent. And her exact words were unforgiving. It's unforgiving. She did not go into any more detail than that. So my question here is, what has happened since you were a child? You don't have to tell us if you don't want to. I mean, if this has been going on for years, I wonder why it's getting worse. If it's getting worse, I'm not supposed to give advice, but I don't really care. Maybe like talk to a priest, or you're a Christian, maybe talk to like a bishop or any clergy that you can to see if they can maybe try to help you. If you guys want a part 2 to this story to find out what happened as she was an adult, then let me know. I can ask her. I'm going to respect her wishes if she does not want to tell us, but I can definitely ask her because I sure am interested to know. I don't know. I think that whatever this is messing with you in a big way. It's trying to make you feel crazy. That's what it seems to me. And it just is trying to make you feel alone and isolated. That's what it seems like to me. That was my first thought after reading this story. Before we go into the shout outs, I do have to say something. I have noticed that ever since I have had to censor myself, that my stories have changed. So I'm going to be much more selective about the stories that I tell. I am going to be paying a lot more attention to the stories and just seeing if there's any contradiction in the stories that maybe doesn't make sense, because I feel like some of the stories that I have told, some of the stuff doesn't really make sense, and I don't notice it until after I post, and I'm going to be more selective about that. And also, my platform is going to change back to the way it used to be. I won't be censoring myself anymore. I don't care about like how many views I get, like that. I care about the community that I have here, and I want it to be back to what it used to be. So those of you who are noticing a change and a disconnect in the stories that I used to tell and the ones that I'm telling now, don't worry about that anymore, because that's not going to be happening anymore. And regardless of how that affects me or my page, like, it's just how I want to run my page. It's my page. So we'll be going back to the way that it used to be. If you guys have any stories that you want to share, just know that I will be more selective about them. Not in a bad way, not in a way that like your story's not good enough, but in a way where I need to think and feel that you're being truthful. I'm gonna be paying more attention to that so that I don't catch it after I am done telling the story. Thank you so much to those of you who have been so patient. I will be making another video about this, but I am gonna wait till the algorithm kind of resets. The reason I haven't been telling stories the past few days is because I have not been able to. Literally, I couldn't post. I would go to make a video and the draft would get deleted. And this was happening this is happening to everybody right now. I don't know if you guys know that. Okay, I'm gonna quickly do the shout outs because I don't have that much time. Stories from the witching hour. First of all, I love your name and I love that you have your own page of spooky stuff. I went and followed you. Second of all, thank you so much for saying that you love my stories. That means so much to me. I appreciate you being a part of my community, and I appreciate you being kind and commenting and pushing my videos out, and I wish that I could say more, but I'm running out of time. I love you so much. Jenny Reyes 12, you said that you listen to me while you clean and do all that other stuff, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for listening to me and supporting me and being a part of my community. Thank you for telling me that. I love hearing that so much, and you have no idea how much I appreciate you. Again, I wish I could say more, but I have like 10 seconds left. I love you so much. And with that being said, my name is Kaisa, and I tell your paranormal experiences on here every single night, or ones that you recommend to me. So if you're into that, hit that follow button. And I don't have time for the rest. I love you so much.
After After this submitted story, I fully understand why certain women keep their pregnancy a secret. I am back with another spooky story. We're gonna call the person who submitted the story Marianne. So Marianne says that when she got pregnant, everyone told her she was lucky. Lucky to have a man who wanted to marry her, lucky to be carrying her first child, and lucky to be welcomed into his family. And Marianne said if that's the case, nobody ever told her how dangerous luck can be, especially when it comes wrapped in fake smiles. So Marianne was living in Jamaica at the time, sharing a modest home with her fiance and his stepmother. We're gonna call the woman Ma. Well, she wasn't his real mother. His biological mother passed when he was young and Ma stepped in. Everyone praised her for it and everyone said she was a good Christian woman. Strict, yes, but very respectable. Ma never once raised her voice at Marianne, never cursed her, and never told her that she didn't like her. Marianne had a feeling that maybe she wasn't Ma's favorite person. To say Ma didn't like Marianne felt like a reach. Marianne's fiance winds up proposing to her while she's pregnant, and Ma insisted on giving Marianne a birthday gift. She said it was also to welcome the baby. It was a tiny gray kitten, no bigger than her palm, with cloudy green eyes. Very cute kitten. While giving her the cat, the stepmother says to her, animals are protective, especially cats. At first, Marianne thought it was sweet. Even her fiance. Then wild inconveniences started happening. Small things, like forgettable things too. She would trip on nothing. Mind you, this lady was pregnant. Dropped plates, woke up nauseous long after her morning sickness was supposed to be gone. She noticed that the baby wasn't moving as much. Her ankles would swell up. Her head felt constantly heavy, like she hadn't slept in weeks. She would go to the doctors and they found nothing. Blood work was clean, ultrasounds was normal, the baby had a heartbeat, it was strong and steady. One doctor winds up telling her that it might be stress. Another doctor suggested allergies, and that's when they mentioned the cat. The doctor told her to basically keep it out of the bedroom. The doctor told her that pregnancy can make you sensitive to things that never bothered you before. So just keep the cat away. She can't sleep with the cat anymore, so she puts the cat in a separate room. And strangely, when the cat was put away, Marianne felt better. She could breathe again, the nausea erased, and the baby was kicking. But every time the kitten came back near her, the heaviness returned. Air felt thick, her chest would tighten up. She started having nightmares. Dreams of an old woman sitting at the foot of her bed, rocking an invisible baby while humming. Still, no one is putting two and two together. No one, except for a little boy down the road. One afternoon, this boy came running into the yard screaming, claiming that he saw something in that room where the cat was kept. He said that he saw the kitten stand up on two legs and turn into an old woman. The skin folded in on itself. Little boy is so out of breath and confused that nobody knows what to make of this. What do you mean you saw the cat transform into an old woman? Everyone laughed. Even Ma said that children see nonsense. Like, this is a result of too much TV. That little boy left, never came back. That night, Marianne lost the baby. And Ma insisted on watching the cat for her. If you want to know how the story ends and how Marianne discovered that Ma was behind this whole time, you're gonna have to leave a comment for part 2 because I have to get to work. But trust me, you'll never believe what happened next. From your favorite Haitian homegirl.
People move out of their house not because they can't live at their house anymore due to expenses or that they want a bigger home. Sometimes they move out of their house because they can't deal with the grief of losing someone they love and seeing them manifest before their eyes, doing things that they used to do. Liz and Margaret lived in their Merchantville home in New Jersey since 1930. They ended up selling the home in 1998. However, the only reason that they sold it was because Margaret had naturally passed away. Now, it was natural causes. It wasn't that something happened bad to her, but she had died, and Louis couldn't live there anymore by himself. After Margaret had passed away, Louis had thought that he had seen her around the house multiple times doing things that she usually did. Drink coffee, come down the stairs, fold the laundry, things that he used to see her do when they were together, but he never acknowledged her because he thought he was hallucinating. Time it really got bad and he couldn't handle it anymore, so he decided to sell the house. In 1998, he had sold the house to a family of 3. Family buying the house was amazing. It was a great price in a great neighborhood. What else could they ask for? However, the old man did not let them know that the house also came with Margaret because he swore he was just hallucinating. So, of course, long and behold, Margaret made herself known. However, Margaret didn't make herself known that quickly to the adults. But to the little girl in that house, she made herself known. The girl began to tell her parents that she kept seeing an old lady in her closet. Not just in her closet, but in the kitchen, coming down the stairs, even in her bedroom, standing at the doorway. Of course, her parents had their beliefs, and they said, well, we'll just pray it away. Whatever it is, we'll just pray it away. One night, they decided to pray for the little girl to be able to go to sleep and stop seeing whoever it is that she's seeing around the house. Now, Margaret didn't take well to this. The little girl not seeing Margaret around the house was a blessing in disguise. She didn't know who that old lady was, and she did not want to know. She was just scared of the old lady because she knew the old lady did not physically exist in this realm. Remember, this was the late 90s, so house phones were still a thing and cell phones not so much. Now, when the little girl got home, she's thinking, okay, I'm going to be home alone for an hour until my parents get home. I have to call them at their job to let them know that I'm home safe, and I'm just going to watch TV. He's thinking that after that prayer, whatever that thing was or old lady was no longer in her home. So she gets home, she takes her book bag off, and the moment she shuts the door, she hears a scream coming from up the stairs. And all she could hear is, "You think you can get rid of me in my own home?" Like that, a gush of wind hit the girl in the face, and she started to cry and say, "No, no, 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 no," and turned around and tried to open the door. And as she's trying to open the door, she could hear the old lady in her ear tell her, "This is my home, and you are the intruder." The little girl stood outside crying, and finally when her parents got home, they asked her what happened. "Why are you outside? And why are you crying?" And she said the old lady said that we are the ones that are intruding in her own home. We are the intruders, and we're trying to kick her out. And they're like, "The old lady said that we're intruders. What?" So the dad runs inside and tries to find the old lady. Doesn't find anybody. And he comes back outside and he says, "I don't see anyone." And that's when the mom saw her. She was standing right behind her husband with this face of disgust and anger. And she pointed at the old lady in disbelief. She couldn't speak. Her husband turned around and saw no one. Decided she was going to do some investigation in the house. And what she found out was that the old man that sold them the home was the first owners of the house and they were the second. However, the old man had purchased the home with his wife, and she didn't remember the old man with his wife that day selling the home to her. She just remembered the old man. And all he kept saying was that he couldn't live in the house anymore because there was too much grief, too many memories. And she's thinking that the grief and the memories was the apparition of the wife not leaving the home. Able to track down Lewis, the old man, and she was able to have a conversation with him, and she told him, "Listen, we keep seeing your wife around the house." "Well, my daughter is, and then I saw her. What should we do?" And he's like, "My wife, but my wife died." She said, "No, she has died. However, her spirit has not died." I'm going to tell Lewis, the old man, "Your wife won't leave our daughter alone. You need to come to the house and tell her that we're the new owners and that she needs to make peace with us because we tried to pray her away and that did not end well." First, Lewis decided to go because he felt bad that the whole reason that Margaret was haunting these poor people was because he sold the home because he thought he was hallucinating her. So he went to the house and room and expressed to Margaret's spirit, even though he couldn't see her, that it was time to move on. And if she wasn't ready to move on, that she had to make peace with the family because they really did love the home and they really wanted to live there. And it wasn't fair to them to be haunted by her anger. So stressed to her. Don't haunt the baby. The little girl just wants to enjoy her room, wants to sleep at night, not knowing that you're staring at her while she's sleeping. If you could definitely do that, that would be great. But I can no longer live here with you, Margaret, Lewis said to her. "I can't. Your memories are bringing me grief, and all I want to remember is the happy moments that we shared, the loving moments that we shared in this house. And I don't want to be here anymore. I'm sorry. I need to leave. And if you're going to stay, you need to make peace with this family." Lewis left, the little girl says that the old lady stopped coming around often. However, she still made herself known, but not in a scary way, just in a way of smiling from afar and disappearing into the wall. But nothing more and nothing less. What do you guys think that was? And do you guys think that was really Margaret? And if so, would you guys be able to live with her in your home?
You know, at night when you're turning off the lights in the house and you get to that last light, and as soon as the light turns off, you start seeing things, you start hearing stuff. So you take off running as fast as you can and you lock yourself in your bedroom. That's probably happened to you thousands of times. It's happened to me. But what is it about turning off the lights at night that makes it so creepy and terrifying? Now, there was this man named Christopher. Christopher was from Columbus, Ohio. And he said this one summer, him and his family moved into this very old home. And he said one of the things about this home was he didn't like it at night, especially when it was dark. But his father was very particular about turning off the lights at night. And so because he was the last person to go to bed, he always had to go downstairs and shut off all the lights throughout the house. So he said one night he had left several lights on downstairs. So he goes down there and he starts turning off lights. He said he got to the last light, which was the living room, dining room area. And as soon as the light turned off, he began to hear some noises. He said it sounded like footsteps running around in the living room. And out of the corner of his eye, he could see the shadow of something moving. So he ran as fast as he could to his bedroom, and he slammed the door shut. And he hears these footsteps coming down the hallway, all the way up to his bedroom. And he thought for sure whatever this was going to come in his room. But it was quiet. There was nothing. And this happened every single night, where he would have these weird experiences after he would turn off the lights. He told his parents about it. They didn't believe him. They thought he had an active imagination. But he knew that there was something going on in this home. Said another night he went downstairs and he shut off the lights. And he said as he was making his way through the dark, he ran into something. And he physically felt whatever it was that was moving around in the living room bump into his side and knock him over. And so he started to scream. His parents come downstairs. They turn the lights on. And they're like, what's going on? And he's like, something ran into me, like something is down here. Once again, they yelled at him, told him to go to bed and stop making noises. And he just really didn't know what to do except run to his bedroom every night. So he said finally he got fed up. And he's like, you know what? Tonight, when I go and turn the lights off, after I turn the last light completely off, I'm going to flip it back on and see what this thing is. So he went downstairs and he went to the living room, dining room, and he turned the light off. And as soon as the light went off, he could hear the footsteps and he could see this thing moving. And as soon as he hits the light switch up, back on, he looks and sees a pair of legs running around without an upper body. And he screams and runs to his room as fast as possible. And he said eventually they moved out of that home. But he definitely thought that it might have been haunted.
It is not a good time to live in the valley. No, it is not. Not only did people go crazy buying everything at H-E-B because of this winter storm thing, but something creepy was captured in McAllen, Texas. Thank God in McAllen. That's like 40 minutes away from me in Harlingen. So this happened in January 21st and it's in Spanish, so let me try to translate this. So apparently in this neighborhood, a lot of the neighbors had security cameras and it captured this person. I'm thinking it's a person, maybe. Wait till you see the pictures. So what they see is a super skinny person walking in the middle of the dark, in the middle of the night. But what kept everybody shook is because they think that they see a baby in her arms. Apparently, moments after being captured, this figure went running really fast away from there, almost like inhuman. Nobody knows who this is or what this is, and they cannot make sense of this, but let me stop talking and show you what was captured. So this is the first picture. My thing is, why is it a picture? Where's the video? Show us the video. Stop lying to us and scaring us. What if this isn't even real? In my head, I'm saying it's not real because I need to sleep at night. This is the other picture and the legs do look very inhumane, but also like, could the camera distort somebody, especially when it's nighttime and there's no light? Possibly. You asked for a close-up, right? That looks like a dog. I still have yet to see a baby in arms. Hopefully this is just somebody who was running at night and maybe that's why it looked like that. No, if I saw that, I'd be terrified too. But maybe it is a person. Maybe they were just moving too fast, you know? This is all that we could capture. Oh my God, I'm making it sleep tonight. What do you guys think?
This is the reason why you should never ever sleep with a mirror facing your bed. I'm telling you, because this horrific horror happened to me in a rented apartment, and up to date, I still get chills when I think about it. Story time. So I got a job in a complete different town. This town is like remote, in the middle of nowhere. So at first, I was worried how I was going to actually get a place to rent. I searched and I searched online. Lo and behold, I saw this one-bed flat It was perfect for me because I'm single. I have got no one and all I'm just thinking about is work. Anyway, the rent was ridiculously cheap. I didn't question it because it was good for me. So I took it straight away. I signed a lease and then I moved in. Tell me why a couple of days after moving into that apartment, I started hearing the floorboards creaking. I kid you not. Sometimes I could feel taps on the walls, like in between the walls. I was freaked out and I thought, what is going on? Then I struggled to sleep. I'm constantly waking up at odd hours of the night. I thought maybe it's just a new house. That's why my body's trying to adjust and get used to it. But one thing which is really strange is there was this really old, haggard mirror hung up directly opposite the bed. So when you laid in bed, you can actually see yourself in the mirror. Anyway, on this night, I was sweating. I started getting really bad dreams. I woke up, but then my whole body could not move. My eyes could move, and I was wondering what is going on. I turned to look at the mirror. Tell me why my whole body in the mirror is laid there. My eyes suddenly look up. I'm not looking up at the light bulb, but my eyes suddenly look up at the light bulb. Then it turned around to look at me with this smile. It stood up, walked closely to the mirror, and had a grin on. It whispered something creepy. At this point, I don't even know what to do because I can't even move. Then it walked back to the bed and it disappeared. When I turned around to look next to me, tell me why I could see another version of me laid next to me on the bed. Do your research before taking cheaper houses, because this is very, very freaky, I'm telling you.
I just love a good glitch in the matrix story, and they're even better when the glitches help somebody out. So this guy tells his glitch in the matrix story that he says has been driving him crazy all week. He says that the week prior, he must have dropped a pair of headphones out of his pocket onto the parking lot as he was going into work. He was specifically bringing them in because he needed them for a Zoom meeting that day. So at first he thought he left them in his car. So he quick ran out to go get them. And then on the way, he did notice that they were in the parking lot and they were smashed. Obviously, people had run over them. He said he was super bummed out because he used them all the time and he loved them. But then he was like, well, no big deal. I guess I'm just going to have to buy another pair. So fast forward to the end of the day, he goes home. And when he gets there, he went and dug out an old box that he needed to get some old paperwork out of for work. So he reaches into the box and he feels and pulls out the headphones, like the exact same pair of headphones that he had seen smashed on the ground, and they were completely brand new. He says, for a little bit of a backstory, he lives alone, only him and his dog, and he has never previously purchased a pair of these headphones. In fact, they were specifically for iPhone, and he had only just gotten an iPhone for the first time recently. Not to mention that these specific headphones came with the iPhone, only one pair. So he never would have bought another pair to just sort of be bumping into. He said what also was really weird is that this old box he dug out contained nothing but old paperwork, like tax documents and stuff. So obviously he's like really excited about this. That's awesome and all, but it's so weird. He said when he originally found the smashed headphones outside, he had taken a picture and sent it to his buddy. And then when he found these later on, he also took a picture of the new ones and sent them to him. And his buddy's the one who brought it to his attention that it might be a glitch in the matrix, which ever since he said that, now he can't stop thinking about it. He also makes one more note that this box that he dug out was like 15 to 20 years old. And it had, like he said, old tax documents of his and his dad's, like an old birth certificate and something else. And guys, he said this box was taped up, like it had been taped up and sealed away for years. You gotta love it when the universe helps you out. This also reminds me of that glitch in the matrix story that happened to me. It's in this playlist if you go back deep enough. It's about a soccer ball that had split open. I bought a second, it split open. I almost went and bought a third, and then miraculously one of the originals was healed. Freaking nuts, man. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, follow for more creepy story time.
Did you guys hear about the woman that literally froze? No, I guess not to death, but she froze. Her body was stiff like a block of ice. and survived to tell about it. On December 20th of 1980, Jean Hillard, who was 19 years old at the time, was driving down a very rural part of Minnesota when her car just like randomly stalled. Now, mind you, this was 1980, before cell phones or anything, any way of being able to contact anyone. After her car stalled, she decided to bundle up and walk 2 miles to get to her friend's house in frigid temperatures. It was negative 22 when this happened. As she was walking the 2 miles back to her friend's house, she apparently fell a couple times in the ice, but decided to just keep on going. Just 15 feet away from her friend's front door, Jean collapsed. Like, her body just couldn't take the frigid temperatures anymore, and she collapsed. Well, no one found her till the morning, which means that Jean laid on the ice for 6 hours. When her friend found her, Jean was completely stiff. She was completely stiff, her eyes were open, and like there was no life left to her. Her friend decided to pick her up. They couldn't even bend her body. They had to like pick her up and put her, I guess, in a pickup truck because they couldn't fit her in any other car. They put her in the back of a pickup truck, got her to the hospital. When they got to the hospital, the doctors didn't know what to do because she was so stiff. They couldn't even put like IVs in her because her arms were blocks of ice. They decided to put her underneath like heating blankets and just slowly, essentially like thaw her out. After a few hours of them putting her underneath these heating blankets, she started to regain consciousness. Like later on that day, she woke up. It took her about 49 days to fully recover in the hospital, but after she walked away from all of this, she didn't lose any limbs. Like she didn't have no sort of frostbite. Like she was 100% back to normal after, well, it took her time, but like the fact that our bodies can freeze in those negative degree temperatures and actually make a full recovery till this day completely baffles like doctors, because this was unheard of.
My mum told me the following story a few years ago about an experience she had when she was younger. I always think about it as it creeps me out, but also I feel slightly that she was being looked after. Anyway, our family has always lived in the west coast of Scotland. Around 30 minutes from Glasgow, my mum moved out when she was 17, just round the corner from my gran, so she felt better about the move due to this. Years passed and she loved the little flat. She was now 19 and sometime during the past 2 years, her nana passed away. She was obviously very upset by this. She was grieving a lot, but over the years she came to terms with it and tried to move on. She had a loft in her flat that she kept her nana's ashes in, which were kept in a box with a lot of her nana's belongings like jewellery, photos, etc. She was extremely close to her nana and felt guilty for leaving all her stuff up in the loft, but grief hits you in strange ways. She says she couldn't bear going near it. She was scared of what emotions she'd be faced with. One night before work, she was fast asleep in her bed, and she woke up slowly to an uneasy feeling. The time read 1:01 a.m., not feeling scared or in fear, but just an uncomfortable feeling. She described that her heart was beating very fast, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what was making her feel this way. She started thinking suddenly about her nana and just had a very anxious feeling surrounding this, almost like she could feel her presence, but not in a positive way. So she got up out of bed to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she walked out her room, the loft door was wide open. She couldn't find the metal pole that closed the loft, so she left it as it is and assumed it had swung open on its own due to the flat being old and not in the best shape. This was the 80s. However, she still felt a negative presence over her when she was getting water from the kitchen and started to feel uneasy thinking about that loft door. She made her way back to her room, which passed the front door, and to her surprise, she checked the front door out of muscle memory and realised the door was open. Not open as in wide open, it was shut, but she hadn't locked it. My mum did say back in the day it was normal for people to leave their doors unlocked, but she always locked her flat door due to being a lone female. As soon as she locked the door, a sudden feeling of calmness and peace fell over her, and she brushed the feelings off that she was experiencing earlier. My mum then went to her bed, had a peaceful sleep. She woke up at 5 a.m. for work, headed out by 5:30, forgetting what had happened the night before. When she returned after her shift, there were police everywhere and a crowd of people surrounding the area. Panicked, she ran up and asked the person what was going on. There was a schizophrenic man who was trying doors around 1:30 a.m. and had broken into a flat a few doors down from my mum and violently attacked a young woman living there. Luckily, the woman was fine, but all my mum could think about was her nana. Why would the loft door randomly swing open when her nana's ashes were up there? Why did she feel uneasy until she locked her front door? We all fully believe my mum's nana was looking out for my mum all night, forcing her to wake up to lock the front door. As my nana always said to my mum, "I'll always protect you, even when I'm not on this earth anymore.
Let's read another scary Reddit story. This one I feel like is a little more interesting. It's like interesting and creepy, but I think you're gonna really like it. This story is something my grandfather told me a long time ago. It happened to a good friend of his in China. Anyway, this friend, I don't know his name, so let's call him Bob, was visiting some other friends in a village and was invited for a feast to try a rare delicacy. The men of this village had caught a rare turtle from the river. In China, turtle is considered very nutritious. It was a quite large turtle also. A friend from the village who caught the turtle invited my granddad's friend to eat it at dinner time. They all had a good meal and all that and decided to dispose of the shell by breaking it and grounding it into powder and scattered it. Later that night, when everyone was sleeping, Bob had a nightmare and saw the turtle, who was very angry at him. The turtle claimed to be over 500 years old and was about to ascend into heaven when he was captured and killed by these guys from the village. Ordinarily, he would not have minded it, but he was angry that his shell was ground up into powder, making it even harder to recover his essence. So he said that for revenge, he was going to take his life. Bob, of course, pleaded that he had nothing to do with it and didn't partake in the killing or grounding of his shell and was innocent. The turtle thought for a while and decided to forgive him, but said his friends were guilty, and then he woke up. He thought nothing of it at the time until he had breakfast with the group of guys, only to realize they all had the same dream that night. There were 13 guys in total there. Later that night, they all became sick and died, except for Bob. Yeah, so Bob later left and told my granddad about this, and he would always bring it up when there was nothing to talk about. Okay, I feel really bad for the turtle, but I can't help but wonder if this is like a Chinese folklore story. Whether it's real, whether it's folklore, urban legend, whatever, it's really interesting. So yeah, don't fuck with turtles.
I just got back from the Chihuahuan Desert and I got really interested in some of their lore or their urban legends, and this is the one of La Chuza. There are many versions of the story, but they all kind of start out the same, with a woman who lived alone in a small town in northern Mexico, so like the Chihuahuan Desert. The townspeople were always suspicious of her, and they didn't quite know what was going on with her because she lived by herself. And then one day, a little boy went missing, and this was the perfect ammo that they needed to attack her. They all claimed that she had taken the child, and they started calling her a witch. They all say that she is the reason that this little boy is missing, she is a witch, and they attack her. In this version of events, the woman tries to make a deal with the devil. She wants to come back and get revenge, but she wants to be a shape-shifting owl. And that's how the legend was born. Many parents use this as a cautionary tale to keep their kids out of trouble. They will often say, La Chuza will get you if you go out late and do bad things, basically. Parents would often tell their children that La Chuza would try to scratch them or claw them with her talons, and if she was big enough, that she would simply carry them away and do whatever she wanted with them. This legend is often thought to be a part of another cryptid, the Big Bird of Robstown, and this is a town close to Corpus Christi, Texas. In 1975, a group of people were walking down when they saw a huge owl humanoid creature swooping down. Some said it was only 2 feet tall, while others said it was up to 6 feet tall. But this soon tied into La Chuza, and they thought that the legend was real. And the version of events that I really like to talk about is that La Chuza will only go after men who are walking alone, mostly drunkenly, and she will only attack them if they're bad men. Like if they treat their wives poorly or their children poorly, or, just overall bad men. If there is a cryptid that is actually attacking men who treat their families poorly, I'm all for it. Let her do what she's got to do. But what are your thoughts on it? Do you think that there could be any truth, or is it all just a legend? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and follow for more spooky things.
It's been a while, and I'm back with another ghost story to share. So this story happened when the person went ghost hunting with her family. So this story happened during the September holidays, and my family and I went to book a staycation at a chalet. This is probably the chalet nearest to Pasir Ris Park, if you know where that is. So on our second night, my 2 uncles, 2 aunties, and 2 sisters and I decided to go ghost hunting near the chalet, which is Pasir Ris Park. They wanted to visit the watchtower, which is notoriously haunted. It was really dark and we visited many places. We started our walk when we entered the darkest area. My first uncle led us with a very bright torchlight, and my second sister and I held hands and walked close to each other. Our first destination was a shed, and there were 2 sheds at the entrance, and my uncle pointed at something strange. It looked like a doll with braided blonde hair with bangs. I squinted my eyes to see it clearly, as it seemed very odd and unexpected, sitting beside a pathway next to a bin. Initially, I thought the doll was inside the round so-called bin, and my first uncle was pointing directly at it. I assumed he saw it too, but as we headed towards the shed, I looked back, hoping to see it clearly, but the doll in the bin was gone. It just vanished into thin air, and that's when I felt my heartbeat racing. I was so scared that after that incident, I kept looking down during our walk, knowing I couldn't see any paranormal activity, but it was my first time, and it terrified me. My aunties have the third eye and they can see ghosts, so they can see all the pontianaks and kakaks in the trees, among other things. We brought an EMF reader to detect ghosts. My sister, whom I was holding hands with, was wearing white, and she was the only one in white. When she held the EMF reader, she pointed it at her head, and at some point, it turned red, but we didn't see anything. We decided to leave and walk to our next destination while pointing the EMF reader around. As we walked out of the place, my sister pointed it at her head again, and it turned red. The next morning, one of my aunties said that a kakak had been following her from the shelter, hanging on a tree, following her. After that, we continued walking, but my second uncle had a bad feeling and made us rush out of the dark place. As we found the exit and were about to leave, my second uncle was left behind in the dark without a torch. We looked back, thinking he might be possessed or something, but my first uncle went to him. He was looking into the trees where it was very dark, and my first uncle looked at it too, but they both didn't see anything. As that happened, my auntie rushed the rest of us to move forward quickly as both of my uncles came to the exit too. The next morning, my uncle told us he heard clapping when we were exiting, which made him stop in his tracks. This is not the clapping that you think it is, yeah? My auntie said that she heard it too. She also mentioned that when my second uncle was staring into the woods, she saw a kakak directly in front of him, but he didn't see it. That's why my auntie rushed the rest of us to go forward first. Hope that you guys got out safe and that nothing followed you guys home. If you guys have any stories to share, drop them in the link in bio and I'll check them out.
Weird spooky story time. Have you ever stayed at the Bayview Hotel in Aptos and had this particular dream? I received this story from someone who said that they stayed at the Bayview Hotel with her friend and her friend's boyfriend. Her friend's boyfriend's family had recently purchased the Bayview Hotel. Now, I don't know if they were the current owners, but they were at the time of this story. When she went to sleep, she started having this super realistic dream that there was this party downstairs and there was this little girl in old-fashioned clothes with dark brown pigtails. The little girl started luring her upstairs, like as if she wanted to tell her something. She said she kept waking up from the dream, and then when she would fall back asleep, it would pick up right where it left off. After about like the second or third time of waking up and falling back into this dream, she ended up telling her friend and her friend's boyfriend what was happening because she said it was freaking her out. So her friend's boyfriend goes, "Oh my God, I have chills all over my body because my cousin had the same dream." He said that his cousin and his wife were living there for about 2 months and he had this dream recurring. He said the little girl would always lead him upstairs and into one particular room. His cousin said that it was driving him so crazy that he decided he was going to pull up the flooring in that particular room. His wife was like, "You're freaking crazy." And as he was pulling up the carpet where his wife was standing in the room, he saw the little girl standing there. She said after she heard this story, she started praying to the Archangel Michael, and her friend's boyfriend said that he did a bunch of research on the Bayview Hotel and he couldn't find anything related to like a little girl passing or anything like that. But you know what? Sometimes these hauntings aren't because someone passed there. Sometimes just something traumatic happens and their soul just goes back to that place. Maybe it's like an unresolved trauma. Maybe there's unresolved issue. I'm not really sure. Has anyone else stayed at the Bayview Hotel and had this dream?
A lot of strange things have happened to me in my life. Like most strange things, sometimes they are so strange that one can rationalize them and put them away, forget about them entirely. There are a couple of instances I have like that. I know something weird happened, but I just don't remember what. It was too weird that I made myself forget about it. However, there are a couple of instances that I remember very vividly.
these instances don't even feel real. It feels more like a memory, and it's almost a third-person point of emotional view, despite me being able to see it from the first-person physical point of view. The first thing I'll share is the most uncomfortable memory I have. It's the reason I feel uncomfortable right now, typing this out. I was married at the time this happened, and we were together for about 3 years by this point. My now ex-husband had just started going to school at night to become an electrician, and I was alone a lot when he started school in this big house. It was his parents' house, which we rented from them. It feels weird to admit that I always felt weird about the living room and the kitchen, and about the hallway, and I would get this weird pang of terror whenever I would leave my own bedroom. I always had a feeling of being watched. His parents didn't like me, and eventually I got it in my head that maybe my ex's mother's distaste for me was an ever-present energy that just existed in the house. Like maybe the reason I felt afraid was because whenever they'd come to visit, she'd leave her negative energy behind. I did everything I could to try and make the house more comfortable for me. I put pictures on the walls and put rugs down, bought more furniture, and put my books and things all over, but I still felt uncomfortable in that house, and it was always around nighttime. One night, when my ex-husband went off to school, I was in the living room on my computer. I had my headphones on. I had only one light on in my area. I'd lost track of time while I was editing, and the sun went down before I thought to turn on more lights in the house. I don't think it was a good idea to work in the dark, so I took my headphones off and turned on some lights. I turned the hallway light on, where I went into the kitchen to turn that light on as well. For whatever reason, I was a bit irritated passing that hallway when I turned the light on. I'm not sure why, I just felt randomly irritable. And for no reason that comes to mind whatsoever, I turned to the hallway and addressed that closed door to his parents' old bedroom, who don't own this space anymore. I actually told the energy around the room to fuck off, but immediately I felt like I'd done something wrong. My stomach tightened, and I felt like this change in the air, like static almost. The air felt alive. My hair stood up on my arms, and I felt very uncomfortable. I sat down at my desk, and behind me on the couch were 3 of my dogs, which I could see from a mirror nearby. I put my headphones back on, and I started working again. My dogs caught my eye in the mirror. They seemed to be visibly agitated, and they were all staring right into the living room, no longer lying down on the couch. Their eyes were wide, and they were just completely locked in to whatever they were looking at. I took my headphones off and turned around to them, telling them that everything was okay, because I wasn't sure why they were reacting like that. They seemed scared, felt myself get irritated again, because I felt like this was my ex's parents' energy asserting their dominance and scaring my dogs because of what I'd just said. So, I stood up and addressed the living room. You're not allowed to scare my animals. You're not welcome here. I felt a little silly saying it, but in that moment, I was fully conflicted. I was agitated on behalf of my animals, by who at this point had been displaying this kind of behavior randomly for weeks, and I didn't want my animals to be frightened this way, frightened in the way that I was feeling all the time. All of a sudden, I felt like I was going to pass out. I felt this wave come over me. Everything went dark in my vision. I felt it in my chest, in my heart, and in my stomach. I felt wobbly and unsteady on my feet. I felt a force in front of me. I really don't know what else to call it. Just this big, ugly, heavy force of energy. Despite this, I fight through it. I stay standing. I try to address this presence, whatever it is. I try to say some religious stuff, in the name of the God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but instead of saying holy, my mouth, without my permission, forms the word whore. I literally said the word whore. I couldn't believe what I had just said, and I was shocked. I didn't even know how the word came out of my mouth. It's not a word I use for anyone, ever. I just don't talk like that. Immediately, my anger went into overdrive. I felt like I had been manipulated. The words coming out of my mouth weren't my own, and whatever it was had made me say it. It was calling me that. In that moment, I tried to do my best to clear the energy out of the house, but no matter what I did, it did not leave.
There's a good reason why people close their curtains at night in the Appalachian Mountains. There are things in those woods that are terrifying. And one of those things happened to be the Appalachian Wendigo. Now, there was this man named Jim Jim decided one day that he was going to sell everything he had and buy some acreage of land in the Appalachian Mountains and start this homestead. So Jim finds this good piece of land and he moves there, builds a cabin and several structures. And for a year, his life was amazing. He said one day, though, he gets a knock on his cabin door. And he said he opens the door. On the other side of the door was this older gentleman. And he said the gentleman started speaking. He said, "Hey, my name is Fox. I live not too far from here. And I wanted to check on you because I know you're all alone out here. And things can happen to people who are alone in the woods." And Jim was kind of like, why is this guy saying all this and stuff? So he said the guy continued to talk to him, but all he could think about was the fact that this guy, Fox, looked exactly like his father, who had passed away when he was a young boy. And he said it was just very, very eerie. It was like talking to his father. So he said, finally, the guy said, "You be safe out here. I'll see you later." And he said the way he said it was kind of creepy. So he said this guy, Fox, he just walked away and took off into the woods, and he never seen him again. A couple months after this, he said, one night he was asleep in his bedroom, and he awakes to this sound of scratching. And he said the scratching sounds were coming from his window. And he said when he looked over in the direction towards his window, he sees the shadow appear, and it's almost in the shape of a person. And he said the shadow just moved across the wall, all the way around him to the other side of his bed. And he said the next thing he knows, something was holding him down. He could not move, and he was panicking and freaking out. And then he said, all of a sudden, it was gone. And he got up, and he said, that must have just been a really crazy dream. So he said, this kept happening to him. He kept having this, what he thought at the time was a dream. Well, one day, he said he was out on his land setting up some traps. And he said he happened to notice in the snow there was all of this weird movement. And he said, "What is that in the snow?" So he goes a little closer, he grabs a tree branch, and he moves the snow over. And he said out popped several rats. And he said that's when he realized these rats were eating a deer carcass. And he said it was just so sickening that he had to start vomiting. And he said as he was bent over vomiting into the snow, he looks up, and there is the guy, Fox. And he said the guy was just standing there staring at him. And he's like, "Hey, what are you doing out here on my property?" And he said Fox looked at him and said, "You seen the deer?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "You see, a lot of weird things happen in these woods." And then he said he turned and just walked away. So he said, that was like a really weird encounter. Like, did he have something to do with that deer or whatever? So he said, next couple of days, he really, really kept having these nightmares where he would see the shadowy thing in his room. And then he said this one particular night, he was sitting by the fireplace and he was just contemplating life. And he said all of a sudden, the next thing he knows, he just stood up. He started walking towards the door. He opened the front door of the cabin and he starts walking out into the woods. And he said it was weird. It was like he knew what he was doing, but he couldn't control it. And something was just drawing him into the woods deeper and deeper. So he said finally he stops and he's just surrounded by trees. It's completely dark. And he said the next thing he knows, he hears his father's voice say, "Son, come here, it's your father." And he said out of the shadows steps that guy, Fox again. And he said, "It's me, I'm your father. Come here, come give your father a hug." And Jim's just kind of like, well, "No, you're not my father. My father's not here anymore." And he's like, "No, I am your father. Like, I've been here the whole time. Come give me a hug." And he said he just like didn't trust this guy. He thought he was crazy. And he said all of a sudden, this guy's skin began to peel off. And he said that's when he could see this wasn't his father. This wasn't a man. This was this pale, white, skinny creature with sharp teeth, sharp claws, and these bright yellow eyes. And he said this thing said to him, "I said, come here now." And the voice had changed. So he said next thing he knows, like he was able to get awareness again. And like he was aware of his situation where he was at. He turns and he just takes off running. He gets back to his cabin. He jumps in his truck and he leaves his cabin and just abandons it. And he said after a couple of weeks, he didn't know what to do. So he went to this Native American man in town that everyone said was a medicine man. And he told him like what had happened and stuff. And he said, this Native American man said to him, "What you seen was the Wendigo, what my people call the Wendigo." And he said, "He has chosen you." And the reason he hasn't taken you yet is because he wants you to be as afraid as possible, because to them, the more fear you have, the better you taste to them. And he will continue to follow you and, harass you until he finally gets you afraid enough that he will take you. So Jim said he decided to sell the cabin, and he never went back there again. And he said still to this day, he can hear scratching sometimes at his window, and he will see the shadowy figure in his room at night.
One of the least known, most hazardous jobs on the planet is saturation diving. These highly specialized divers do construction and demolition at depths up to 2,000 feet below the surface. Now, unless you're familiar with diving, that depth may not stand out to you, but it should. Deep sea divers breathe compressed air, which is usually a mixture of oxygen, helium, and nitrogen. During the dive, the oxygen is breathed in and completely used up and does not linger inside of their body. But the helium and nitrogen, they are absorbed as they're breathed in into the bloodstream, and they remain there for the duration of the dive. As the diver ascends in the water column, the pressure on them from the water is reduced, which allows these two gases to clear out of their bloodstream. But they clear at different rates. Helium is considered a fast gas, which means you absorb it quickly and get rid of it quickly, but nitrogen is a little bit slower, and so it takes longer for it to absorb into your body, and then takes longer for it to clear out of your body. If a diver doesn't respect this and just rockets to the surface, any of the nitrogen or helium that did not diffuse out of their bodies will bubble up inside of them like a shaken soda, and it will wreak havoc on them, and many times it can be fatal. This condition is known as decompression sickness, or the bends. The way divers mitigate getting the bends is they have decompression stops in their dive, which means after they go down to a certain depth, on the way up, they will stop at a certain depth and just wait, and they will allow these gases to diffuse out of their bodies before making their way up to the surface. These decompression stops are planned and built into the dive beforehand. The deeper you go, the more frequent your decompression stops will be and the longer they will take. To give you a sense of just how long these decompression stops can be, if you dive down to just 250 feet, it might only take you about 15 or 20 minutes to get down there, but the return trip will take almost 4 hours due to the number of decompression stops. If you're going down to 2,000 feet, it will take you over 33 hours to ascend. Naturally, this ridiculous time constraint poses a huge problem for any industry that relies on deep sea work, like oil and gas, because they simply don't have enough divers to compensate for how long these decompression stops take. They tried sending remote-controlled vehicles down to these depths to work on these offshore wells and rigs and pipelines, but they lack the touch and maneuverability to do the job. And so, in the 1960s, a crazy solution was implemented to get more people down to these depths for longer periods of time. And it was then that the commercial saturation diver was born. Instead of divers spending hours and hours making all those stops on the way to the surface, they constructed these underwater chambers that the divers would go into after their shift was done. They would sleep inside of these claustrophobia-inducing metal chambers, and then the next day they would put their dive gear back on, hop outside of the chamber, and then just start working again. Nowadays, these chambers are either left down at depth where the diver is located, and they can just go in and out, and that's the whole process, or there's a dive bell that sits down near the work site, and the diver, when they're done, goes back into the dive bell. It kind of looks like an escape pod, and it's raised by a crane all the way up to the surface, where it's placed on top of a ship or a rig, and inside of this dive bell, the pressure is artificially made to match the depth they've been working at, and then when they're placed up on the surface on the ship or the rig, the bell is connected to a bigger chamber that's also set to the same pressure they're at down at depth, and they can go inside this chamber, they can sleep, they can eat, go to the bathroom, and then the next day the process is reversed where they go back into the dive bell, it lowers them down to depth, they hop out, and they continue their work. The point of this system is to keep divers fully saturated with their inert gases like nitrogen and helium so that they only have to do one major decompression at the very end of their shift, which is oftentimes multiple weeks long. Now, while the saturation diving system has worked extremely well, it's still extremely hazardous, which is part of the reason why it pays really, really well. Some divers have died because they panicked and got hurt. And if you think about what their job really entails, they are going down thousands of feet all on their own into total pitch black nothingness. They have one crummy light that can barely see about 10 feet in front of them. They're operating heavy, dangerous equipment. There are large animals swimming around them that they can't see. Oftentimes they're perched on a pipeline, clinging to it, that if they were to fall off of it and detach from the dive bell, they would sink into an abyss and no one could get them again. And so it's an easy place to get hurt. Other divers have died because they were given the wrong mixture of gas. And so at depth, they began having seizures, and there's nothing anyone can do to help them. But the most well-known and brutal saturation diving accident involved something called explosive decompression. On November 5th, 1983, 4 saturation divers were working off of the Bifford Dolphin oil rig in the North Sea. Just after 4 a.m., 2 of the men, Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas, were in their bunks lounging inside of that chamber that sat up on the rig. The other 2 men, Bjorn Bergensen and Troels Hellevik, had just finished their shift down below. They had gone into the dive bell and were being raised by crane to go up to the chamber on the rig. Once the dive bell was up on the rig, 2 dive tenders named William Crammond and Martin Saunders began clamping the bell onto the side of the chamber. Without getting too into the weeds about how it actually works, getting divers to go from one highly pressurized area, the dive bell, into another highly pressurized area, the chamber, and vice versa, basically, it just boils down to opening doors at very specific times, and doing it wrong will result in catastrophe. The process was going just fine. Hellevik and Bergensen had exited the dive bell, they'd gotten into the chamber, and they were literally in the process of shutting their internal door when outside, dive tender Crammond made a huge mistake. Before Hellevik had sealed his door, Crammond, for whatever reason, undid the latch that connected the dive bell to the chamber. And what this did is it created a vacuum that instantaneously depressurized the chamber where the 4 men were from 9 atmospheres down to 1, and it created so much pressure coming out of the chamber that it fired the dive bell straight out like a bullet, killing Crammond and severely injuring Saunders on the outside. Inside the chamber, all 4 men literally had the air ripped out of their chests. Hellevik, who was closest to the door, was literally sucked through the narrow crack because the door had not sealed. He was sucked through and rocketed out the other side. Basically, all 4 men exploded, but fortunately, they died instantly. In 1980, Bobby Shafran was on his way up to Sullivan County Community College, which is 2 hours outside of New York City, to begin his freshman year. Even though he was from the area, he didn't know anybody that was going to this particular school, and so he was pretty nervous about it. Plus, he wasn't that popular in high school, and he had a hard time making friends. When he pulled into a parking spot at the school, he saw a sea of people getting out of their parents' cars and carrying boxes up to their dorm rooms. And so he took a deep breath, hopped out of his car, grabbed his backpack, and began walking across the lawn towards the dorm building. On his walk over, Bobby was surprised when he felt like all these random strangers on the lawn were looking at him like they knew him. And a couple people yelled out to him and said, "Hey, it's good to have you back here." And one girl actually ran up to him and kissed him on the cheek and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy you're back." And Bobby said, "I think you got the wrong person. I don't know you." And she laughed and she just ran away. And so Bobby's totally bewildered by this because he doesn't know anybody, but everybody seems to know him. And so he walks up the steps and he goes inside the dorm building. And as he's walking down the hall, people are high-fiving him and patting him on the back. And then right as he's about to turn the corner towards his actual dorm room, someone down the hall behind him yells out, "Hey, Eddie, what's going on, man?" And Bobby knew whoever it was yelling at him. Because this whole situation had been so weird, he felt like this had to be a case of mistaken identity. And so Bobby turned around and he saw at the other end of the hall another student who he didn't know, clearly waving at him and yelling out, "Hey, Eddie, come here, what's going on, man?" And so Bobby walks up to him and says, "Hey, I'm not Eddie. I don't know what's going on, but everybody thinks I'm somebody that I'm not, but I'm not Eddie. Who's Eddie?" And the guy said, "Yeah, okay, Eddie, it's good to have you back here, man," and then walked off. And so Bobby's like, what is going on here? And so Bobby turns and he goes back up to his dorm room and he goes inside and he just shuts the door and he's thinking, I just want to be left alone for a second because this is not right. This is not how a freshman who doesn't know anyone gets welcomed at any school or any place in the world. This is totally unusual. And just a couple of minutes after being inside of his dorm room, he hears a knock on the door and Bobby's like, oh great, who is it now? Who is it that thinks I'm someone I'm not? So he opens the door and there's another student who he doesn't know who's standing there, and this guy, his face just drains of color and he starts shaking when he sees Bobby, and they're both looking at each other like, what's going on here? And the student says to Bobby, "Were you adopted?" And Bobby said, "Yeah." And then the student said, "Is your birthday July 12th? And Bobby said, "Yeah." And so the student goes, "Okay, my name is Michael, and I am best friends with a guy named Eddie Galland, and you are his clone. You have got to be his identical twin." At this point, to Bobby, this almost made sense, but it was so crazy to imagine having some identical twin he didn't know about. And so Bobby asked Michael if he could go meet Eddie, because he's got to be a student here. And Michael said, well, actually, Eddie decided not to come back to school this year, which is probably why everyone you talked to was so excited to see you, because they love Eddie, and they thought you were him, and so they're psyched to have you back. After talking for a couple of minutes, Michael tells Bobby that they have to go call Eddie, and they have to set up a meeting so that Bobby can meet Eddie and vice versa. And so Michael and Bobby run outside to a payphone booth. They hop inside, they're crammed in there, and they dial up Eddie. And as soon as Eddie answers, Bobby grabs the phone and just says, "Hey Eddie, my name's Bobby, and everybody thinks I'm you." And then Eddie says, "Yeah, I've been getting a lot of calls about that too." And Bobby would later say that when he first heard Eddie's voice, he said it sounded like his own voice coming through the phone. And so ultimately, Eddie invited Bobby and Michael to come to his house so that Eddie and Bobby could see if it really was true that they were twins. And so Michael and Bobby hopped in Bobby's car and they sped 2 hours to Eddie's house. And when they got there, it was the middle of the night, and Eddie's house is the only house in this quiet suburb that has all the lights on. And so Michael and Bobby walk up the path towards the front door of Eddie's house, and right as Bobby is about to knock on the door, it flies open, and standing in front of Bobby is his exact clone. It's Eddie. And Eddie's looking back at Bobby, and he can't believe what he's looking at. They are definitely identical twins, and they both immediately saw that. Michael would say after Bobby and Eddie just stared at each other for about a minute, they just started laughing. It was like they were total strangers, but at the same time, they had this connection immediately. They knew they were related, and they were laughing, and they hugged, and they just stared at each other. And Michael said anytime Bobby would tilt his head, Eddie would mimic it, and vice versa. It was like they were looking into a mirror. Shortly after, this story of these two long-lost brothers reconnecting found its way to Newsday, which was a prominent local newspaper in New York, and they decided they would look into it to see if it was really true or not. And so one of the editors had a junior reporter fly out and actually see Bobby and Eddie face to face and see if it was really true that they were in fact identical twins. And as soon as this reporter saw them, they knew immediately that, yep, they're related. And so Newsday printed this totally heartwarming fairy tale story about these two long-lost brothers reconnected after all these years just because of a chance encounter in college. And everybody loved it. But this is where the story went from amazing to truly unbelievable. Friends of another young man living in the New York area named David Kelman began telling David that he had to check out this Newsday article about these long-lost twins because these two twins look exactly like David. Specifically, they said you gotta look at these guys' hands. They are just like yours, David. David was known for having these enormous hands, and a lot of the pictures of Bobby and Eddie in the news showed their hands, and they too were enormous. And so David finally picked up a newspaper and looked at a picture of Bobby and Eddie, and sure enough, he was shocked. They looked exactly like him. And then when he read the article, it showed their birthday was July 12th, the same as his, and they were born at the same hospital he was born at. And so he's thinking, these are too many coincidences. They have to be my brothers. And so David called Eddie's home phone number, and Eddie's mother picked up, and she asked who was calling. And David said, "Hi, my name is David Kelman. I was born July 12th, 1961, and I'm looking at a newspaper article of two identical twins that look just like me, and one of them is your son. I think I'm the missing third twin." After hearing this, Eddie's mom apparently dropped the phone and yelled out, "They're coming out of the woodwork!" So Eddie and Bobby went to David's house, and as soon as they walked in and saw David, they knew right away he was one of them. He was the third twin. And apparently, within minutes of meeting each other, they were wrestling and laughing hysterically on the ground. It was like, even though they were strangers, they somehow already knew each other and had an instant connection. David's family members that witnessed this first interaction said it was the most incredible thing they had ever seen, that it was just so wonderful to see these long-lost siblings finally reconnected after all these years. Shortly after David realized he was the third missing twin, Newsday did another story talking about how there was actually 3 missing twins that had all been reconnected, and once again, it was just this incredible Cinderella story, and now this story went all over the world. They were on the cover of every magazine, every newspaper, they were on every talk show, and everybody had the same question. What similarities did they discover? And they would say, well, we all wrestled in junior high school and high school, we all smoked the same cigarettes, we like the same food, we had the same taste in women. And on talk shows, when they would answer these questions, it was immediately clear that they all shared the same mannerisms, and on on the show, they would routinely interrupt each other and finish each other's sentences. It really was like they were the exact same person, despite having been raised completely separate from one another. The boys loved the attention they were getting. They had become international rock stars overnight, and all three of them were immediately so close. They were best friends right away. They moved into an apartment together. They went out partying. They met Madonna. It was just this incredible time in their lives. And so they weren't asking questions about why they had been separated in the first place. But their parents were asking a lot of questions because they had not been told by the adoption agency that the boy they were adopting actually had two identical siblings. They had no idea. So the boy's adoptive parents reached out to the adoption agency, which was Louise Wise Services. It's based in New York, very prestigious, basically the most powerful and wealthy people in New York use this adoption agency if they're going to adopt. And so the parents reached out to them and asked for a meeting so they could get some answers as to why their kids have been separated. And so the parents go to New York, they go into this meeting room with the top brass of Louise Wise Services, and they say, did you separate our sons at birth on purpose? And one of the executives said, yes, we did, because it's really hard to place three children into one home. At which point David's adoptive father lashed out and said, that's absolute BS. If you had told me he had two identical siblings, I would have taken all three. But the agency stood by their decision and said that's the only reason it happened, and so sorry, that's all we can tell you. And so the parents were very frustrated and felt like there was much more to the story, and in fact they felt like the agency was actually lying to them about why they had separated their sons in the first place. But they couldn't get any more information, so they left the agency. And right when they got outside, Bobby's father realized he had left his umbrella inside of the meeting room. And so he turned around, went back inside, walked down the hall quietly so he didn't want to disturb anyone, and he opened the door to the meeting room and he reached in to get his umbrella, and he looked inside and he saw the people he had just met with from Louise Wise Services had just opened a bottle of champagne, and they were laughing and smiling, and they were clearly toasting each other on a job well done. And even though Bobby's father did not go in there and confront them about what they were celebrating, he got the sense that they were celebrating having dodged a bullet, that they clearly had just lied to the families of these three triplets and they'd gotten away with it. And so between the parents' general sense that the agency was clearly hiding something, and then Bobby discovering this champagne toast as soon as they left, the parents decided they needed to get in touch with some lawyers to help them get to the bottom of why their sons had been separated. And so initially, a number of really prestigious law firms in New York were excited to take this case. But shortly after, they all contacted the families to say, well, actually, there's a conflict and we can't do it anymore. And the parents believed this was because the adoption agency, Louise Wise Services, and some of their more prominent and powerful clients were pressuring the lawyers not to dig into this, that clearly there was some secret that they did not want uncovered. And so unfortunately, the parents hit a dead end and didn't know where else to turn to try to get more information. And so over time, they kind of just accepted that this is just the way it is. And as for their sons, they didn't really care that much because the way they looked at it, at least they had each other now. And so over the years, the boys continued to stay really close. They started families of their own and had lots of family get-togethers. It was just a really happy time in all of their lives. And at some point, the boys actually went into business together and opened their own restaurant in New York called Triplets. And the first year, it was extremely successful, did over $1 million in revenue. But in the second year, the brothers started to fight with each other about how to run the restaurant. And in many ways, this was their first major conflict. They hadn't grown up together. They had never really fought. And so now they're fighting over money and how to run the business, and it got really bad really quick, and they just could not come to any sort of compromise. And so at some point, Bobby left the business. He said, I don't want to do this with you guys anymore. And apparently his departure just completely ruined the dynamic of the three brothers. Eddie was the most affected by this fracture in their relationships. All he wanted was for his brothers to be really close and for their families to spend time together, and now all of that was in jeopardy. And so Eddie started showing signs of severe depression and was ultimately hospitalized for 3 weeks. And then shortly after getting out of the hospital, he took his own life. This was beyond devastating for the two brothers and the rest of their family. Around this time, a journalist named Lawrence Wright, who had always had a fascination with identical twins, found an obscure scientific article called Psychoanalytic Study of the Child. It detailed a New York-based study about identical twins that were intentionally separated at birth and then given to different adoptive families to be studied, although it wasn't clear what they were actually studying or why they needed identical twins to do this research. In this article, Lawrence discovered all the babies that had been used in the study came from the same adoption agency, the same one the triplets had come from, the Louise Wise Services in New York. And so Lawrence called Bobby and told him that based on this article, it seems like he and his brothers were used in a scientific study. Bobby and David were totally furious. They felt like they'd been treated like lab rats. They also wondered if their being separated at birth had a negative impact on their mental health, and that might have contributed to Eddie's depression and untimely death. Lawrence wound up writing an article about this twin study he had discovered, and after he published it, another set of twins found out they had been a part of the study and discovered themselves. These two women were also struggling with depression, furthering the idea that the study could have led to irreparable harm to their subjects' mental well-being. At this point, David and Robbie did not expect anybody to be held accountable for this study. Instead, they just hoped to find out why it was done and what they were testing for and what the results were. And so they began working with Lawrence to try to get those answers. They contacted Louise Wise Services, who did admit that yes, actually this was part of a study, but they didn't give any information about what the results were or why they did it. And so they did some digging and they discovered the guy in charge of the actual scientific study was this doctor named Peter Neubauer, who was this very well-known psychologist in New York. And so Lawrence managed to get an interview with this doctor, but the doctor basically said, I won't answer any of your questions and I won't give you any information about this study. And he never published his findings. Right before the doctor died in 2008, he made sure the entire study was put under seal inside of the Yale University archives so no one could access it until 2066, which has led many people to believe that the reason he set it so far out was to guarantee all of these subjects in this study would have died by the time it was made publicly available, protecting his own legacy and the people that were involved in this study. In the recent documentary called 3 Identical Strangers, Dr. Neubauer's personal assistant, a woman by the name of Natasha Josefowitz, she was interviewed and they asked her, can you shed any light on why this study was done, what they were testing for, and what the results were? And she would say that she was not actually part of the study. She was more on the periphery, but she was privy to what they were doing. And she said the point of the study was to finally put to bed whether it was nature or nurture that made the person who they ultimately become. Basically, are your surroundings the thing that ultimately makes you who you become, or is it just your genetic makeup that you're predestined to become a particular person independent of how you were raised? And she said the results were incredible, that basically it has nothing to do with nurture. It's all about your genetic makeup, that we unconsciously trend towards specific behaviors and decisions, but we believe it's free will. We believe we're choosing to do certain things, but in reality, it's basically predetermined. And specifically in the triplets case, Bobby was intentionally placed into a more affluent household where his father was a doctor and his mother was a lawyer. And so they were very well educated, and that was his upbringing. Eddie was placed into a more middle-class family with his father being a teacher and his mom being a stay-at-home mother. And David was put into a low-income household where they were all immigrants, English was a second language, and they just had this very small shop that they owned. And Natasha said this study demonstrated that despite these boys being put into different socioeconomic levels, it had almost no impact on who they ultimately became. She said she doesn't know why the study wasn't published, but she hopes someday it will be. Also, in this documentary, a doctor named Lawrence Perlman, who was actually one of the researchers in the study that would actually make house visits to each of the boys' houses as they were growing up under the false pretext that they were there as part of routine follow-up for the adoption agency. And he went on record and said that the study was not just about the effects of socioeconomic class, it was really about the effects of different styles of parenting. He said in the triplets case, each of the boys had been placed into their respective households after that household had already adopted another child. And that first child they adopted effectively became the guinea pig for this study, where scientists would come in and they would study this child under the false pretext that they were there just following up for the adoption agency, but really they were creating a baseline of how do these parents parent. And then once that baseline was established, then the triplets were sent into their respective homes with the researchers knowing full well how they were each going to be brought up, with the adoptive father being the X factor. Bobby's father, who was a doctor, was rarely around, but he was devoted and loving to his son. David's father, who was the shop owner, was around all the time and adored his son and loved him unconditionally. Eddie's father was a teacher who was around a fair amount, but when he was very strict and rough with Eddie and quick to discipline him and rarely showed any affection for him. And while Dr. Perlman does not come out and say that Eddie's relationship with his father probably had an effect on him becoming depressed and ultimately taking his life, there are many other people people close to this case that believe that's exactly what it was, that David and Bobby had a stable, healthy upbringing and Eddie did not. And so when he was faced with the crisis of the brothers separating, Eddie couldn't handle it. These same people refute what Natasha said about the findings of the study that we're all genetically predisposed to become a particular person. They say if that was the case, then why haven't David and Bobby taken their lives? But ultimately, because the study was never published, we won't know for sure why it was done, what they studied, and what the conclusions were. All we have is speculation and second and third hand information. But what we do know for sure is these surviving triplets and their families are furious that this study was done. They feel like it ruined their lives. Following the release of the documentary Three Identical Strangers, Bobby and David were actually granted early access to the study that was sealed inside of Yale University. And when they looked at it, they were expecting to be blown away with the results, but it turned out it was over 10,000 pages of very technical information, and much of it was heavily redacted, so they couldn't even read most of it. They were not able to deduce what the purpose of the study was in the first place or what it accomplished. It was just all very ambiguous. This study was ultimately shut down permanently in 1980, the same year the triplets discovered themselves. As for the adoption agency, Louise Wise Services, and all the scientists and researchers involved in the study, none of them were held accountable for their role in this totally unethical study. And so basically everything was swept under the rug. And so Bobby, David, and all of the family members of the triplets were just left with a whole bunch of questions and not a lot of answers.
Are there dinosaurs in the Arizona mountains? Now, going back to the 40s, there have been reports of people encountering these strange dinosaur-like creatures. The most recent sighting comes from a man named Joseph who lived in Phoenix. Now, he said one weekend, him and his friends decided they were going to go camping. And they went to this spot out past the Superstition Mountains near the Tonto National Forest. He said they drove down this desert dirt road and they found this clearing. So they set up camp for the night, and as the sun went down, he said it was a nice clear night. You could see the moon and the stars, and everything was going great. Well, later that night, they decide to turn in and they go into their tents. As they were falling asleep to the sounds of coyotes howling, they noticed that it went quiet. Something happened to the coyotes and scared them off. That's when they began to hear these strange screams that were sort of echoing through the canyon. And about 15 to 20 minutes later, they began to hear something moving through the desert and going through the brush. And that's when something crashed into their tent, knocking it over. And as they struggled to get out, they notice this mule deer that is injured and it's on the ground. And it's just moving around and thrashing everywhere like it's terrified. Right behind it, they see something come out of the desert that they described as a giant-looking crocodile if it had two human legs and was walking upright. This thing lunged towards this deer. And as it was distracted, they took off running to their SUV. But soon this thing turned its attention on these three individuals, and it chases them to their vehicle. They get inside, and this thing is trying to get in. So they started honking the horn. They started screaming and making all kinds of ruckus. And eventually this thing got scared and it ran off back into the desert. Now, Joseph said that he grew up on the reservation and he remembered his grandfather speaking about these lizard people. And he said they were very connected to the reptiles, to the snakes, and to the lizards. And he wondered if that had something to do with what they seen that night.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
All the cryptids, the one that I think could be real is the Jersey Devil, because there have been thousands of reports that have been well documented. I mean, the Jersey Devil has been seen since the 1700s. And these stories and these reports were published in so many newspaper articles. And still to this day, you ask the people near the Pine Barrens, they will tell you the Jersey Devil is real. Now, this is a story from 1998. There was this woman named Deborah. And Deborah said that she was young. She had this boyfriend. They had fell into rough times. So they had a friend who owned some land next to the Pine Barrens. And they let them park their RV there and live in it. And she said from time to time, living out in the woods, you would hear weird sounds or you would see animals. But for the most part, it wasn't that bad. She said then one night she had let her dogs out. And all of a sudden she hears her dogs outside barking at something, like they had smelled the scent of something. So she goes outside of the RV and she's yelling to her dogs, come here, where are you? And she said she could see her two dogs in front of her, but she sees up in the sky this black shadowy figure just come down, take her dog, and pick it up and carry it off into the air. And at the time, she said she thought it was an owl or a large bird or something. So she's freaking out. She's screaming her dog's name. She gets the other dog, puts it in the RV. She calls for her boyfriend, and they go out in the woods, and they're looking for this dog. They cannot find it anywhere. The next day, they go back out into the woods to look for this dog. They notice this one tree, there's red stuff running down it. Well, they look up in the tree, and there is the dog. And it has been ripped apart into two pieces, and it's hanging from the tree. They said this was a German Shepherd. It was, 98 pounds. So whatever it was had to be very big that carried this thing off, right? So after that, she was very cautious with leaving the dogs out at night. She didn't like to be outside at night. And she said a few nights she would, come home later at night and she was bringing some groceries in. And she would hear strange sounds like screams coming from the woods, and she would hurry up and run inside the RV. But she said the creepiest encounter with this thing was one night her and her boyfriend are asleep in the RV. And she said she had this very vivid dream. And she said standing in her bedroom there was this tall creature that had the legs of a horse, had sort of the face kind of a man, had these big long horns protruding from its head, had these sharp teeth, had red eyes. And this thing just looked at her and said, "Hello, Deborah." And she said right as it said, "Hello, Deborah," she woke up. Well, when she wakes up, she thinks oh, it was just a bad nightmare. Well, she hears what sounds like something moving on top of the RV. She wakes her boyfriend up and she's like, "There's something on top of the RV." And they could hear what sounded like footsteps, but if it was a horse kind of trotting on top of this RV. And she said all of a sudden they heard this unhumanly scream. And then, boom, whatever this was, it sort of flew off. The next day, she said she went on top of the RV with a ladder. And she looked up on the top of the RV and could see what looked like dirt impressions of hoof prints. So several months pass, and, they kept having these weird encounters. And she said this night, something just didn't feel right. And she said that her and her boyfriend were watching TV in the RV, when all of a sudden, something just hits the side of the RV. And she said it was so hard that stuff actually fell off the shelf. And she said then they started hearing these loud screams, and there was something outside of the RV, and it was kind of, flying around low, that they could see it out the window. So her boyfriend jumps in the driver's seat, starts it up, and starts driving away. And they said as they were driving, they hear a loud smashing sound on the top of the RV, like this thing was trying to get in the top of, the RV. So her boyfriend just pushed on the gas pedal and went as fast as he can. And he said after about 5 miles, whatever this was, left. And they managed to go to a friend's house. And when they get out, they could tell something was sort of had thrashed the outside of the RV because it was badly damaged. And Debbie said she would never go back to the Pine Barrens again.
It's terrifying how someone completely vanishes without a trace and nobody, not your family, not police, not even the government can find you. So one morning on June 13, 2001, 19-year-old Jason waved goodbye to his little brother as he walked out of his house and into his neighborhood to meet up with a coworker. His car had been stuck in a repair shop for the past few days, and his coworker, we'll call her Emma for story purposes, had agreed to pick him up since they were working the same shift anyways, so it just made sense. And the plan was pretty simple. Meet up at this parking lot at 11 a.m., drive to work together, do the job. Easy. But as Emma's sitting there in her car, waiting, expecting to see Jason walking towards her, there was weirdly no sign of him anywhere. And when she checks the clock to see the time, that's when she realizes, oh crap, it's already 11 a.m. But you see, Emma is a reasonable person, so she figures maybe he's running a few minutes late, so she decides to wait just a little bit longer. But as the time kept going by and there was still no sign of Jason anywhere, she just made a decision to leave the parking lot and drive to work herself before she was late too. But Emma still kind of felt worried a little bit, like Jason didn't even text her that he was going to be late, so just to make sure that everything was okay, she decided to leave Jason's house phone a really quick voice message, basically saying, hey, just wanted to let you know that Jason was late to meet me, so I went to work by myself. But when she got there, expecting to see him, Emma notices that Jason still wasn't there. So she thought, okay, well maybe he's just coming to work late, I don't know. But for her whole entire shift, Jason never made it to work. Now later that day, Jason's parents, Jim and Kelly, come home from their own jobs expecting to see both their sons in bed. But they immediately notice that Jason wasn't home yet. And so they're thinking, well, that's strange. His shift ended not too long ago. He should be home by now. And then they notice the voicemail from Emma. And when Kelly listens to it, when she hears that Jason never made it to the meeting spot that morning, her stomach drops. Because suddenly this isn't like a, oh, he's just running late. This is a, where the hell has our son been all day? Now Kelly starts to panic, and I mean really panic, because she knows Jason. She knows this isn't normal. He doesn't just disappear without telling anyone. He doesn't go MIA like this. Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. So she grabs the phone, ready to call the police right then and there, but then she remembers something that makes her blood run cold. Jason is 19 years old. He's legally an adult, and in most places when an adult goes missing, you have to wait 24 hours before you can even file a missing persons report. 24 hours. Can you imagine that? Like, can you imagine being a parent and not knowing if something is wrong with your child, not knowing where they are, not knowing if they're safe, not knowing if they're hurt or scared or hungry, and just sitting there in your house staring at the door, praying to God that he walks through it and he doesn't? Oh my God, I can't. When the next day comes and Jason still hadn't come home, Jim and Kelly knew that there was just no other choice than to officially report their son as missing. And you would think, you would hope that when these investigators hear about a 19-year-old kid who just vanished without a trace, they would immediately spring into action, right? You would think they start searching, looking for evidence of foul play, doing everything in their power to find this kid. But that's not what happens. Instead, the police basically shrug them off. They look at Jim and Kelly, these frantic, terrified parents, and say, look, your son's an adult. He probably just ran away. It's what kids his age do. And then they do nothing. For 9 days, Jim and Kelly are begging for help, and nothing is being done to find their son. 9 days of no search parties, no investigation, just this dismissive attitude of, he'll turn up eventually. So they keep going back to the police over and over again, pleading, please do something. Our son did not run away. I know this. And finally, after 10 excruciating days, the police agreed to start an investigation. So they began doing what they should have done from the very beginning. They talked to neighbors, asking if anyone saw anything unusual. They followed the exact path that Jason would have taken from his house all the way to the parking lot where he was supposed to meet up with Emma. They're searching for any shred of evidence, anything that might indicate some type of foul play, but the police found nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean zilch, zero, nada. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no personal belongings dropped along the way. It's like Jason walked out of his house that morning and just evaporated into thin air. So the police dig deeper. They pull phone records. They check his bank account, looking for any activity that might tell them where he is or what happened. But again, nothing. His phone hasn't been used. His bank account hasn't been touched. it's complete radio silence. And that's when it sort of hit to the police that what if he didn't run away, but someone took him? And that right there changed everything. They immediately stopped treating this like a missing persons case and start treating it like a potential abduction. They're sharing any information to news outlets, newspapers. They're putting his name out there, describing what he was wearing the day that he left, what he looks like, anything that might jog someone's memory. Jim and Kelly even record this absolutely heartbreaking message that gets broadcasted to the public saying, Jason, please come home. We miss you so much. We have your car fixed and ready to go. But even with all of this, nothing ever came from it. Not an ounce of evidence leading to Jason's rescue has ever been found. And for 25 years, nobody in that neighborhood has ever come forward with any information about where he could be. But do you believe that? Do you believe that in an entire neighborhood where people are coming and going, not one person saw what happened to a 19-year-old kid? Because I don't buy it. That is all I have for today. I love y'all. Let me know what you think. Group hug.
He killed his pregnant wife, who was 1 week away from giving birth, so he could be with his mistress. Belinda Temple had a twin sister and 3 older brothers. She grew up in a really happy family and had a very happy childhood. Growing up, she loved sports, she loved people, she loved life, and she knew that one day she wanted to grow up and be a teacher and be a mom and have lots of kids. While attending university, Belinda met David Temple. When they met, there was an instant connection and they quickly started dating. Now let's talk about David. Growing up, David was that kind of kid that could get away with anything. You know the type. He came from this small town in Texas where high school football meant everything, and he was the high school football star. He was honestly like an 80s movie stereotype. He was the popular football star who was also a huge bully and got special treatment from all the adults in his life, like his teachers, his parents, like he could literally get away with murder. David dreamed of going to the NFL, but that did not happen. At college, David and Belinda were seen as like this golden power couple. They both loved sports. They both were going to be educators. But Belinda's friends and family had some serious issues with David. They saw a lot of red flags. Belinda's personality changed while she was with David. She was always this bold person, this outspoken person who didn't take anyone's shit. But with David, she became more submissive. David began controlling everything she did, and he slowly started to isolate her from her friends and family. And the two were married in 1992 before they even graduated college. After school, they both moved back to David's hometown, where they both took teaching jobs at different schools. David was an assistant football coach, and Belinda was a special education teacher and also a basketball coach. In 1995, they welcomed their first child, a son named Evan. And Belinda at this point was absolutely over the moon. She thought that she had this perfect life, this perfect marriage, and perfect family. But that was not the case. Her husband was living a double life. At the school that David worked for, he would take off his wedding ring every single day before work, and he never mentioned his wife or son. So everyone just assumed that he was single, including his coworker, Heather Scott. Heather and David began dating, and this was actually really known throughout the school that they worked for. Like, it wasn't a secret. And Heather at this point did not know that her boyfriend had a wife and baby at home. And at home, David began treating his wife Belinda differently. He was treating her terribly, even after they found out that they were going to have a second child together. Belinda was pregnant with a daughter they were going to name Erin. She was pregnant, and David would call her fat, even in front of other people. He never went to a single doctor's appointment. Belinda set up the baby's nursery all by herself, and David was just mean and distant. At one point, David actually went literally weeks without speaking a single word to his pregnant wife. And Belinda has no idea what happened, what's going on. She started to blame herself like she did something wrong. David was just more interested in the affair that he was having with his coworker Heather. And at one point, Heather did find out that her boyfriend David had a pregnant wife. She wanted David, so she was thinking about ending the affair unless he left her. That Christmas 1998, David did not get his pregnant wife who was 8 months pregnant, a single Christmas present. But he got his mistress Heather a gold necklace. His pregnant wife Belinda's birthday was 5 days after Christmas, and he didn't get her anything then either. And then the day after Belinda's birthday was actually New Year's Eve, and that just so happened to fall on a weekend. So David told his wife that he was going to be spending that holiday weekend away on a hunting trip with the guys, but he was really with his mistress the entire weekend, going out to clubs, bars, and partying. Belinda was home with their son Evan. She was at this point like nearly 9 months pregnant. She was about to give birth. She could have given birth literally at any point during that weekend, and she was just sitting home alone, devastated, wondering what has happened to her marriage. On January 11th, 1999, less than 2 weeks later, Belinda was about 1 week away from giving birth. David was angry that day because he had to leave work early to go pick up their son Evan from daycare because he was really sick with a high fever. David claims that his wife Belinda came home from work around 4 p.m. and she was exhausted, so she went to go lay down. And to give her time to lay down, David claims that he took their son Evan out to run some errands and then to run to the park, and they were seen on surveillance camera doing that. When they got home about an hour and a half later, David said that he saw that their glass door had been smashed, like someone broke in. He took his son to the neighbors and then ran inside his house to go check on his wife, and his pregnant wife, Belinda Temple, was tragically murdered inside. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Belinda Temple lying face down in her closet. Blood was everywhere. Her and her unborn daughter, Erin, were dead. Belinda had been shot in the back of the head with a large 12-gauge shotgun that was placed directly to the back of her head, and she was shot while she was on her knees, so she was killed execution style, which is just absolutely brutal. This is a pregnant woman. She's a mother. She's a teacher. Like, how could someone be so evil? The scene at first glance looked like it could have possibly been a break-in robbery gone wrong, but the closer they actually looked, the more it looked like it was staged. Not only was it in the middle of the day in broad daylight, which is not common for robberies, but the weapon was also really large, which is also not common in robberies. But the glass door that was smashed, likely smashed so that the intruder could gain entry into the home, well, the glass door was smashed while the door was open, which doesn't make sense. Why would you smash it while it was open if you need to smash it to open it? You know what I mean? The home was an absolute wreck. Things were thrown everywhere. Every single drawer and cabinet was open, but nothing was actually stolen. Belinda's purse and wallet were on the counter untouched. They had expensive jewelry just laying out in the bedroom, which was left untouched. And on top of that, Belinda's husband, David, was acting odd. He wasn't acting shocked or sad. He just lost his wife and unborn daughter, and he was only angry because the police wanted him to come down and make like an official statement and ask a few questions. And Belinda's husband, David, started to immediately look like a person of interest. When he called 911, he told the 911 operator that he was going to check his wife for a pulse, but he didn't have any blood on him, and the scene was absolutely bloody. Like, he would have had some blood on him. The family also had a dog that was really aggressive towards strangers. It was pretty much aggressive towards anyone that was not family. Like, when police first arrived at the scene, they couldn't even enter the home because of this dog. So this dog would have absolutely scared off an intruder. The only living person that dog wouldn't have attacked was David. But David said that he had an alibi because he was running errands with his son Evan at the time that his wife was killed, which was seen on CCTV. But even his alibi looked staged. For one thing, why was he taking his son Evan to the park and to run errands when Evan was extremely sick that day with a high fever that he had to go home from daycare early? But Belinda's time of death was actually confirmed to be like as soon as she got home from work around 4 p.m., which would be a time that Belinda's husband and son would both been at home. And this was also corroborated by neighbors that heard gunshots at the time that David and Evan would have still been home. But unfortunately, there wasn't any slam dunk evidence against David to actually arrest him for Belinda's murder, so her murder went unsolved for years. And with his pregnant wife out of the picture, David married his mistress Heather, and together they raised Belinda's son Evan.
6 long years later, they finally arrested Belinda's husband David for her murder, and their theory was that he killed his pregnant wife because he wanted to be with his mistress and he just didn't want to get a divorce, which I just will never understand. And of course, David pled not guilty, but in 2007, he was found guilty of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison, but that is sadly not the end of the case. After his conviction, evidence of another possible suspect emerged that the prosecution might have buried during the first trial. So in 2016, David's murder conviction was actually overturned and he was released pending a retrial. That new trial began in 2019 by then David's second wife and former mistress Heather divorced him, which did not look good for him. And a second jury found David guilty of Belinda Temple's murder for a second time, but sadly they could not agree on a sentence. So this was declared a mistrial. They had a sentencing hearing for David Temple, and then 2023, 24 years after Belinda and her unborn daughter Erin were murdered, David was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. He tried to appeal his sentence again in July of 2025, but he lost his appeal. David continues to plead his innocence. He feels really bad for himself, and surprising or maybe not surprising to you, David and Belinda's son, Evan, stands by his father, David, and he believes his father is innocent. Really interested to hear all your thoughts on this case. There's a lot of unanswered questions, I feel like, in this one. Do you think David was guilty? Do you think there was enough evidence to actually convict David? Do you think that David's mistress, Heather, had any idea that her new husband killed his first wife? Because I feel like if I was a mistress, which I never would be, that would be like the first thing I would think of if my boyfriend's wife was killed after I said that I did not want to be a mistress anymore and you had to either get rid of the wife or get rid of me. But just a thought, just a theory, just speculating. I don't know anything. Heather has never been, at least to my knowledge, even considered a person of interest. So I'm incredibly interested to get all your thoughts and opinions on this case in the comments, but while you're there, please always remember to be respectful, because you don't know who could be in the comments. Someone that actually knew and loved Belinda in real life could be in the comments. You have no idea, so please always remember to be respectful. Please remember that this is Belinda and Erin's story, and their lives were stolen from them in an extremely brutal way, so please just always remember to be respectful. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we cover this case today, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
She spoke out against femicide and domestic violence, but was killed by her ex-boyfriend. Let's talk about what happened to Eva Moretta. 19-year-old Eva was born in Costa Rica, and she grew up very close to her family, especially to her sister Mariana. Everyone who knew her described her as warm, expressive, and deeply empathetic. She studied social work, she was completing her professional practice at Costa Rica's Child Welfare Agency, and she talked openly about wanting to study law one day so that she could help victims navigate the legal system. Helping people was a huge part of who she was, and everyone in Eva's life said that all she wanted to do was be a source of light for others. In December of 2018, Eva made a public post about the growing number of femicides in Costa Rica, where she wrote about how many women had already been killed that year, and then questioned how many more would die if nothing changed. She ended the post by saying that if someone was experiencing domestic violence, she was there for them and that she would support them and help get them out. She would go to marches, she would go to protests, she was always just posting about violence against women, and looking back at that now, those words hit differently. Why? Well, because Eva was already living what she was warning others about. Eva met a man named Randall Garita, who was a few years older than her, already an adult when she was only 13 years old, and this is when everything began. The two became intimately involved, and over time, Randall became toxic. Eva's parents later described years of verbal, physical, and psychological violence that didn't just affect Eva, but extended to the entire household. Randall was jealous, possessive, and obsessive. He monitored her phone, controlled who she spoke to, and punished her for things that he assumed that she had done. At one point, he even burned her clothes as a form of intimidation. Eva told her friends that she genuinely believed that he was capable of killing her one day. That was the level of fear she was living in, but Randall had total control over her. The two would break up and get back together multiple times, which has led to questions like why Eva didn't report him or fully cut off contact earlier. However, later in the trial, prosecutors explained that Her actions were consistent with long-term coercion and abuse, and the judges described her situation as a pattern of systematic violence that created a psychological trapping effect, where fear and pressure shaped her decisions, and leaving wasn't as simple as just like packing her bags and walking away. There's a lot of things that go into these decisions. And then things got worse when she was 15 years old and found out that she was pregnant. She was scared, but she was committed fully to being a mother. Friends say that she worked, she studied, and she pushed herself constantly to be able to build a stable life for her son, even while living with Randall's abuse. Around the same time, Randall was arrested and sent to prison for a few years for crimes including robbery and substance-related offenses, but being in prison did not end the abuse. He continued to harass Eva via illegal access to a phone. He continued to threaten her, watch her, and just basically maintain control from behind bars. Now, when Eva gave birth, he actually called her and said that he hoped she died and the baby would die. Despite all of this, Eva kept moving forward. She focused on raising her son with compassion and really strong values. She would even bring him to marches for Pride Month and things like that. So she was doing her best to raise her son with the correct values and to also distance herself from Randall and just build a safe and stable life. And, for a brief moment, things seemed to be going well. But in mid-2019, Randall was released from prison earlier than expected on good behavior. And this meant that he was back in Eva's orbit. They lived only blocks apart, they shared a child, and they had a long history together, and he used all of this to keep himself in Eva's life. The two remained in contact for the sake of their son. However, after a violent incident where Randall got physical with their son, Eva sought out protective measures through the courts. She asked multiple institutions for help, where some responses were inadequate, others shifted responsibility, and others said that she was old enough to look after herself, which is insane. Like, she reached out to these institutions that offer help, yet she was denied it. Still, Eva continued trying. She was actively trying to protect herself and her child. And thankfully, she was granted a protective order for her and her son, restricting Randall from seeing them. Which brings us to the afternoon of November 1st, when Eva went to Randall's home despite the protective orders being in place. Now, it's not entirely clear why she agreed to meet with him that day. However, what is clear is that Randall continued using their son as leverage, and that kind of pressure makes leaving and cutting off all ties far more complicated than people truly understand. Now, when Eva arrived at his home, an argument began, and it unfortunately ended when Randall pulled out a weapon that he did not legally own, blocked Eva's exit, and then fired at close range. Eva suffered catastrophic injuries and died before help could save her. After this, Randall just ran out of the house, and luckily, his parents were home, so his mother actually followed him outside. She approached him, and Randall began screaming that he murdered Eva because he believed that she had gotten like an intimate, inappropriate video from another man. Then he actually tried to flee the scene. Thankfully, his mother called the police right away, and Randall was quickly arrested near the family home. His own father told police where Randall hid the gun before he was taken into custody. As for Eva's family, her parents received the call that no parents ever expect. Her parents wasted no time and they rushed up to the house, which was literally 5 blocks away, and were met with a police tape. Unfortunately, that is when they learned and confirmed that their daughter was gone forever. There was nothing that could be done to save her in that moment. Eva's funeral was held on Sunday, November 3rd, and it was full of family, friends, and community members who gathered to mourn her and just support her family. During the ceremony, Eva's father referenced her earlier social media post about femicide and urged society to confront violence against women, and made it clear that silence and indifference only allows this violence to continue, and that he doesn't want another family to suffer the same loss that they have. And unfortunately, in the days that followed, public response became almost as painful as the loss itself. People criticized Eva, they questioned her choices, and spread false claims about her being a bad mother and about her son being present during the crime, which her family has repeatedly clarified that that was not true, that her son was not there when she was murdered. Instead of focusing the shift on the man who killed her, attention shifted towards dissecting Eva's decisions, dissecting her character and her role as a mother. But again, responsibility belonged to Randall and to him alone, no one else. At the trial, the judges relied on forensic evidence and scene reconstruction and determined that Randall blocked Eva's exit and then shot her at close range in a fit of rage. Randall tried arguing that he was on substances at the time and that he didn't know what he was doing, but all of that was rejected by the judges. The court emphasized the long history of coercion and violence that led up to that day. And in June of 2021, Randall was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Judges stated clearly that this was not a momentary loss of control. However, it was the culmination of years of abuse. After sentencing, Eva's parents spoke out about their loss. Her father said that the sentence would never bring his daughter back, but that it mattered for protecting other women. And her mother said that Randall ended Eva's life, but at the same time completely destroyed her family. Since then, the family has focused on helping others and preventing more families from living the same nightmare. They stress the importance of recognizing the early warning signs of domestic violence, challenging harmful ideas about masculinity, and addressing how those beliefs contribute to gender-based violence. Eva's father, Oscar, has shared that he often rereads old messages that he had exchanged with Eva and that he opens drawers filled with memories, explaining that the pain never fully fades, but it just becomes something that you learn to carry along with you. It's truly heartbreaking what happened to Eva and the fact that so many people blamed her for what this man did.